everything has changed since 2019. The post-pandemic global economy is fundamentally different. This doesn't necessarily mean it's dystopian, but it is very much dizzying times. And in kind of like the context of a gloomy macro backdrop, we're seeing exponential growth in areas like generative AI, the commercialization of space, robotics, machine learning, and nanotechnology, to name a few. I actually heard recently AI being described as the biggest technological breakthrough since the splitting of the atom, which is kind of quite a statement. We're watching the singularity getting closer. This is a hypothetical future point in time at which technological growth becomes uncontrollable and irreversible, resulting in unforeseeable changes to human civilization. So how do we make sense of all of this as investors? This is an investment world that rewards much greater selectivity, but how do we even begin selecting? This is where we've got the big guns in, David, to help us dissect it all. So a bit about David, and I'm going to have to cut his bio short, otherwise we're going to be here all day. David S. Rose is a futurist, an associate founder of Singularity University, and the author of the New York Times bestselling books, Angel Investing and the Startup Checklist. He's funded over 120 early stage companies with exits to Uber, Google, Facebook, Intel, and many more. He's known as New York's Archangel, as well as the patriarch of Silicon Valley. According to Business Week, he's a world-conquering entrepreneur. He's actually pioneered the field of real estate in the 80s, developed one of the first wireless data information networks in the 90s, and the first global angel investing platform in the 2000s. I could go on. For over 15 years, David has been teaching and writing about the next paradigm shift when computers and humans meet. Despite the stage being predicted to happen in 2045, it kind of feels like we're already there. David, we're delighted to be hosting you, and we've got lots to learn from your experience and your perspective. Karim, I'll let you kick this conversation off.
Thank you, Irene. So yes, David, welcome. I have to find the video here. Can we put that slide down here? Give me a second here. David, I want to kick us off with associate founder of Singularity University, and we appreciate Singularity University a lot. I want to start off with, you've become very famous for that line which you use, which goes, any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st. That's a big statement. And there are a lot of fluttering hearts here at the moment and confused minds with that. What led you to this conclusion, and what does it mean for our society?
Thank you, Karim. That's actually a very good place to start. And so I put up on the screen Moore's Law. And my guess is that everybody on this call has heard of Moore's Law. Even if you don't think about it all the time, you know it has something to do with advancing technology. So Moore's Law was observed by Gordon Moore, who eventually was CEO of Intel, back in 1965, when Intel was one of the pioneers in the development of integrated circuits, putting multiple transistor equivalents on a chip. And after a few years of improving the technology, the first integrated circuit, the first actual circuit was done in 1958. And then it took them a number of years to actually get two of them on the same piece of silicon. And then they kept growing. And he noted with surprise that the speed at which they could improve these chips was growing. And he made the observation that it was doubling effectively every 18 months, 18 months to 2 years. And so that was an interesting, a bold prediction. And it turned out that things kept going and things kept going. And all of a sudden, as technology began to get into everything, people began to take this as an absolute law, Moore's Law, that the number of transistors on a chip would effectively be doubling every couple of years. And so why is that important? And this is the underlying thing for everything we're going to talk about and everything you're going to look at in terms of investing going forward, right? It's important to understand something called the power curve. We are humans. We're not computers. We think in linear terms. Humans look at the world around us and we say, okay, what is here? What do I see going on? And what happened yesterday? And where is that likely to go tomorrow? And we tend to extrapolate that into straight lines. So as humans, we think linearly along a straight line. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. You keep going in the direction you're going and you keep moving that way. And so if you think about it, if you take one step forward, and for every step forward, you take one step up, like you're walking up a flight of stairs, then you go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, go 30 steps forward. And where are you? You're 30 steps up. And that's the way people think. That's the way we operate. That is ingrained into our mental processes of things. The interesting thing, however, is that when you start looking at Moore's law follows something called the power curve, and that is an exponential growth. It's not a straight line. It doubles, right? And so if you're doubling every 18 months to 2 years, you go 1, 2, same as the first step, but then it's 4, 8, 16, 32, 64, 128, and so on and so forth. But what does that mean in practice? And this is where our minds go completely off the track. If you take that same 30 steps that you were taking linearly, that would have you 30 steps up, but you do them exponentially, where you're doubling, after 30 steps, 1, 2, 4, bingo, you are at 1 billion. And that's the difference. And that's like thinking about a tidal wave. Our minds can't think of that much water in one place. We can't think of 30 steps forward where we are expecting to be 30 steps up and we end up being 1 billion steps up. And so for Gordon Moore to project this about the number of transistors and therefore the computing power that Intel could fit on a chip was a pretty major prognostication. Well, you know what? It turns out that since he made that prediction back in 1965, it turns out that that has been holding remarkably true, absolutely bang on. To this day, to 2023, if you trace it back to the first transistors on a chip, it has been growing at the pace of Moore's law, at this exponential pace of doubling every 2 years. And if you ask Intel today, so Gordon Moore back about 20 years ago said, oh, well, clearly it can't go on forever because it's just going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And, physical laws won't let that happen. So Gordon Moore himself said, well, I see maybe 1 or 2 more iterations of Moore's law back about 20 years ago, but it has to stop. Well, you know what? It didn't stop because over time, paradigms have shifted. New ways, new materials, new engineering methods have come into play. And if you ask Intel today, they will tell you that not only has it continued all the way through to now, but they expect it to continue into the future. And this is a slide from Intel's website that shows you at the rate of this Moore's law increase in transistors per chip, they are expecting to be able to fit 1 trillion transistor equivalents onto one integrated circuit by the year 2030. That is a mind-boggling number if you know anything about computers. And that actually boggled the mind of a friend of mine named Ray Kurzweil. And about 20 years ago, Ray Kurzweil, who's one of the smartest guys on the planet, he won the all kinds of prizes at MIT and the Presidential Medal of Science. He's now director of research at Google working on their AI stuff. Ray said, well, wow, that's amazing. But you know what? Technology existed before integrated circuits. If there were transistors before that, there were other kinds of technology. So, and you can't use a counting method like transistors on a chip to do that. So what if we can generalize Moore's law? And instead of transistors on a chip, Kurzweil said, let's talk about calculations per second. And then let's throw in cost there. So calculations per second per dollar. If you generalize it that way and you look back at technology, how far back can we go and to see if this was actually holding? And so he looked at all of the technological developments, computing developments, adding machines, calculators and stuff of the 20th century, and son of a gun. It turns out that once you get away from transistors on a chip and you generalize the assessment, it turns out that technology has been advancing at this rate of Moore's law since 1900. It took multiple paradigm shifts, going from punch cards, which were invented by Herman Hollerith, the founder of IBM, from the 1910 census, and then going to relays, which allow you to shift a large load with a small effort, vacuum tubes, which allow you to store 1 bit of data, transistors, a solid state logic gate, a solid state circuit that ultimately got put onto integrated circuits. And it turns out that this was a straight line of doubling in technology of calculation power since 1900. So then Ray said, well, wait a minute. If it went back through 5 different paradigm shifts over a century, maybe it went back before that. So he pulled everybody's list of paradigm shifts in technology from the Encyclopedia Britannica and the Smithsonian and the British Museum and so on and so forth. And he plotted them all on a graph, back from fire in the Stone Age and aqueducts and Industrial Revolution, all these things to see what the pace of these paradigm shift changes were. And guess what? Son of a gun. It turns out that technology, once you judge it in terms of calculations or the equivalent per second per dollar or the equivalent, has gone back at this same rate to the beginning of recorded human history. So technology has been advancing at the rate of Moore's law from as far back as we know humans existed, taking into account fire and the wheel and smelting and the Bronze Age and aqueducts and pumps and all these various things. It has been growing at that rate, which is mind-boggling. It starts off small, 1, 2, 4, 8, 16, 32. But 30 steps later, you're at, a billion, or in the case of Intel, with 8 trillion transistor equivalents on this chip. And a funny thing happened along the way. Not only was technology and the power of technology growing at this speed, but the percent of everything around us that is technologically based was growing as well. So if you were just planting a farm, not a problem before, but now technology is being applied to farming, to transportation, you call an Uber, to everything around us. And it turns out that if you look at those charts as well, technology has been becoming more a part of everything we're doing at the same exponential rate. Whoa. Okay, the power is there. It's taking part of everything. And it turns out that as it's getting more powerful and more integrated, it's also getting cheaper. And the prices of this computing power are dropping like a rock at this exponential rate. So here you have computing power growing exponentially, it becoming an exponentially larger part of everything in the world around us, and with a cost that is exponentially dropping, eventually to virtually free. And what does this mean? As now technology is applied to all of these areas, there are areas that didn't even exist as research or development areas 50 or 100 years ago. We call them frontier technologies. And so now if you take this unbelievable growth in computing power and you apply it to everything around us, you apply it to vehicles and transportation, you have autonomous cars, we have fully autonomous vehicles now, you will have them ubiquitous and every car in the world will be self-driving, every truck will be self-driving, every airplane, drone, you name it. The only question is when, not if, but when. You add that in now into production with production robotics. You have everything now is being manufactured. The great changes in the labor force are not related so much to cheap labor overseas. They were 50 years ago. But now you're seeing the replacement of humans by automated robotic production. And then, of course, everybody here is familiar with ChatGPT. ChatGPT, in terms of generative artificial intelligence coming off of large language models, was introduced in November of 2022. The speed with which that has been adopted is nothing short of mind-boggling. Take a guess as to how many people are going to be visiting ChatGPT and asking it a question this month for something that started in November of 22. Whatever guess you have, you're low. It is 2 billion. There will be 2 billion queries to ChatGPT by this month in June. And at the same time, advances are being made by applying this technology power to a whole wide range of other things. For example, we've mapped the human genome. You can go to 23andMe and have your human genome mapped. We're now also mapping the whole brain, the human brain, and the neural networks and pathways that we have there. You may not be aware that there are currently lab demonstrations where they can put sensors on your head and see what you are thinking. These are live shots coming out of a system that is monitoring your brain waves and then drawing a picture of what it is you see. You want to think about somebody's thoughts? It's there. And then how about if you reverse that and you put all of this new stuff into somebody's brain? Well, we're getting there. Last week, Apple introduced Vision Pro, which will likely be the first very mass market adoption, albeit initially the first one very expensive, but allowing true integration of your environment and all this computer generated stuff. We call it augmented reality, artificial realities. At the same time that is starting now with a heavy goggle. Ultimately, it'll be a little laser on your eyeglass pointed into your eyes. After that, it's going to be built into your optic nerve in your brain. As you have all of this technology being applied to nanotechnology, to micro tiny things that are providing the ability for us to make ever smaller and smaller things. If anybody remembers the Isaac Asimov story, Fantastic Voyage, where people shrink themselves and go as a little miniature submarine into your bloodstream to fix things. Well, that's going to happen. That's absolutely going to happen in a matter of not that many years. And so here you have this technology being applied at a micro scale, and you have it being applied at a larger scale. So think about robotics. If you haven't seen the latest demonstration videos from a company called Boston Dynamics, which is known for its robots like Spot the Dog and Atlas, they are literally unbelievable. This humanoid robot can do all kinds of things. You're now seeing these be deployed in the field, the military, all kinds of things. Another area that has not gotten a lot of attention recently, but is really powerful and fascinating and scary at the same time, is that of swarm robotics and swarm computing, where you have lots and lots of tiny individual things that working together without being directed by an external source can actually go and do things, solve problems, and create things on their own. And so when you put all this together, what you get is something very, very interesting. So for example, ChatGPT can write programs. You can tell it to write you a computer program in any of 20 different languages. But you know what? ChatGPT was not programmed to be a computer program writer. Where did that come from? If you ask the developers of ChatGPT, they will tell you, we don't know. It came because it was trained on billions of pages of things that people have written, with the training of these large language models being figure out what a person would answer, a real person would answer to this question. And the way it does that is it continually tests and trains itself to see if what it would do is what a person would do. And so when you put all this together, all of this artificial intelligence, all of these new applications of AI and computing power to all the things around us, you head to a fascinating world of emergence, where some of the abilities that you're seeing now in ChatGPT alone in this version are emergent technologies that weren't programmed there, that came out of this programming. And so what happens now when the next generation of computers begin programming the following of computers? What happens when you have computers and humans that are doing things together that you couldn't do separately? And that is what Ray Kurzweil and others have described as the technological singularity. And the technological singularity, the term was coined originally by Werner Ving, I believe, is that point in the future where technology has advanced so much and is so integrated with humans that effectively humans and computers have merged. And you take all the things that are good about humans and all of the power that computers have, which is, as you see, growing mind-bogglingly rapidly, and you put this together. And when that happens, one of the reasons it's called the singularity is because that is the event horizon. We have no clue as to what's going to go beyond that. The changes are so fundamental and so extraordinary that we can't even envision, science fiction writers can't even envision what this world will look like when that happens. And you know when Ray Kurzweil and many others think this is going to happen? Well, Ray wrote a book about it. It's called The Singularity is Near, in which he projected that the date of the singularity is 2045, thereabouts. And he says, you know what? If he's off by an order of magnitude being wrong, okay, it's 2051. If he's off by 2 orders of magnitude, 2057. Okay, what if he's off by a factor of 1,000? Okay, 2061. So the bottom line, in our lifetime, and certainly in my lifetime, we are going to see this world where technology has so advanced and so changed everything. So fundamentally, the world as it exists today is not one you would recognize. And it is therefore the most important thing you can take away from this session today is understanding that and thinking about that, and then reversing that and saying, okay, now that I know where the world's going to be in 20 years, what kinds of businesses, what kinds of approaches, how do I change my organization to deal with that? And that's why I said that any company that was designed for the way the world existed in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st, because all of these new technologies and all of these new paradigms, whether it's open source or crowdsourcing or the communications network that ties them all together, these are all such fundamental changes that you have to completely re-envision your business model. And companies that can do that, people like Amazon, for example, will thrive, and Apple and the other ones who are leveraging technology to the fullest. And companies that are just cash cows and milking what they were doing for a century, no matter how nice and wonderful and hardworking they are doomed unless they can change themselves to be prepared for the singularity. And that's why any company designed for success in the 20th century is doomed to failure in the 21st. So with that, Karim, over to you, and let's have a Q&A.
So David, thank you so much for that. I'm a little bit, I've got so many things whirling around in my brain, and especially the part where you said initially, when ChatGPT started to come up with programming options and they didn't know where it came from. That's kind of scary.
Well,
to hear.
To hear that, you have to understand how AI works. And this is what most people don't realize. Most people tend to think of computer programmers like historical computer programmers. You were saying, I'm trying to get a program to do X. And so here are the steps that you do to get from A to B, to get to X, right? You do this, and then you do that, you multiply this, divide that, and take my number here and change it over there. And it's a very programmatic, follow these steps and follow it faster and better, more accurately than I can as a person, but follow these steps to get to the end of the line. And so people, when they think about artificial intelligence, are thinking that that's what programmers are doing. They are programming this thing to take a question and answer the question by pulling from a database or calculating something or whatever. But that's not the way these large language models work. Instead, what they do is they do a little bit of programming, and the little bit of programming says, okay, system, take this input from a human, and then project what you think a human would say is the next thing given the background that you've got. Okay, and then do that. And then the question is, how do you test it? How do you see if that would actually be what a human would say? Well, you train it by giving it everything that humans have said, in this case, 8 billion pages of things that humans have written. And the computer looks at it and says, okay, well, this one wasn't particularly close, but this one looks like it was. So whatever process the computer used internally to do that, whatever neural network pathway I went down to get that, well, that's what I'm going to add more weight to. And so the next time it comes in, a question comes in, it does it again. And if you train it a long time on billions of pages of human data, and you let the computer effectively program itself by figuring out what it was doing that led it closer and closer and closer to what a human would do, that's how you end up with this generative emergent AI, which can do things that it wasn't programmed specifically to do.
Let me try to understand that a little bit. So all the information that has been produced thus far that the generative AI companies, ChatGPT as an example, is using was and has been created by us. Now you have new information being created by generative AI. What does that mean? Because it's no longer in our brain that we've actually produced this information.
Well, so this is where the emergence and the merging comes in, and the convergence, right? So one of the things that all these systems have, if you use ChatGPT or Poe or any of these systems, it asks you for feedback. What was this the right answer? Or if you give it feedback in line in your session, you say, oh, that wasn't right. So for example, the first version of GPT-4, I asked the question, tell it about David S. Rose. And it gave me a whole wonderful, loving bio. And it said, oh, by the way, he's married to Esther Dyson, and they live in New York. I'm saying that was a surprise both to me and to Esther and to my wife. So at that point, if I left it unchecked, it would have said, oh, let's add that to my fact base. But I said, no, he's not. And it comes back and says, oh, I'm sorry, I made that mistake. I'll, correct my thought process. And so there is this big feedback loop. Those 2 billion questions that people are posing this month to ChatGPT, in many, if not all cases, when you're giving feedback to it, was that right? Was that helpful? Is that factually incorrect? Is it hallucinating? You're providing human feedback. And that human feedback on top of the training feedback from the automated training feedback is improving and improving and improving. And then what you end up with is generative stuff coming out of GPT based on sounding like a human on the original data in there, and then further modified and approved and with the feedback of a live human. And that's how you build. And so we are not today at general artificial AI. In other words, this is not ChatGPT is not a human, despite what some programmers at Google might have thought. But it's getting suspiciously close. Some people have said, not Sam Altman, not OpenAI, but some people have said that they believe ChatGPT, or the GPT-5 model, which is projected to come out by the end of this year, may actually achieve general AI. But whether it's this year or next year or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, right, somewhere in that line, that's going to be, again, a game changer when you now have computers that are intelligent like people and have a lot more processing power. What happens? And that's where things begin to get really, really interesting.
So I'm going to take a little bit of a diversion here just so that we can catch everyone up to speed. And there are a lot of new attendees here just because you're here, David. As a company, Linqto, what we do is we try to identify companies that are emergent or emerging, that have developed some sort of technology and are pacing. So the investments that we make generally are companies that are like a $500 million to at least a $500 million valuation, so that they've got some background. What we do is we bring those companies we make investments in those companies onto the Linqto platform. We then allow our investors to invest alongside us moving forward, so that they can partake in an opportunity that has never been available to them prior to the existence of Linqto, which is invest in emerging companies and technologies that would have been very difficult to find without all the stuff that we do there. I don't want this to be, I'm not making predictions or anticipated. I'm not a financial advisor to anybody. It's like, this is what we try and do. So we have a lot of investors on this call. And one of the things that we always want to ask is, what do you see as the most emergent technologies in sectors that are due for a haul over much more rapidly than other investments? So what would you invest in today?
So if you think about everything I've just been talking about in terms of the singularity and Moore's law and exponential growth, you realize that this applies to literally everything we are doing. If 15 years ago, I had told you the biggest emergent industry is taxi cab dispatch systems, you would have looked at me like I had 3 heads. Or if I had said, oh, it's renting out your spare bedroom, what? Or if it's, posting what you did today, for your friends. None of these would have been on anybody's list of anything. If you made a list of 1,000 things, they wouldn't have been on there, right? But what happened is once you apply this exponentially growing technology, everything is open, right? So for example, autonomous vehicles. People have been talking about this for 25 years or so. And as recently as, God, 10 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, if you said self-driving cars, people would say, oh, yeah, that's, Tom Swift and his invention. Sure, that'll be here. My great-grandchildren will see totally autonomous vehicles. Well, guess what? It's here. And the only question is, when will they totally replace human-driven vehicles? I mean, not going to be next year, certainly by 10 years, right? And something in single-digit years. And so therefore, rather than jump on a bandwagon of saying this particular area or that particular area, is the future, plastics, it actually is the investing in the right entrepreneur, the right company, the right vision that can see where things are going and apply this, right? So for example, in the case of artificial intelligence, there are three ways to play that game. One of which is the development of these large language models, and they are getting very expensive. It's one thing to train GPT-1 on 1 million pieces and GPT-2 on 10 million. And by the time you get to GPT-4, you're training it at a cost of decamillions of dollars or hundreds of millions of dollars across decabillions of pieces of information. And so developing those kinds of models are going to be relatively exclusive to, a handful of major companies. In the same way that you're not going to build a search engine today because trying to compete against the major search engine players is challenging. But there will be not one large language model. It's not only going to be GPT and OpenAI, there will be others as well. So that's one place you can play with large companies. Another place where there's a wide open for innovation is the application of these existing large language models into other areas. Whether you're talking about, the low-hanging fruit today are things like, writing social media posts or letters or emails or things like that. But once you begin to look at generative AI across anything that people with a college degree are writing, any kind of reports or analyses or new ideas or plans or programs, all of that is going to be handled ultimately by generative AI. And the interesting thing is that despite the general training of these people, there will still be a need for the application of these models to specific domains. And I think you're going to see a second very large group of companies, much larger than the first and smaller than the first, applying this generative AI to a wide range of domains. And that's why I said any company in any area that is not going to be applying this kind of AI is doomed to failure, right? The third approach to doing this is the hardware approach, because all of the generative AI stuff is virtual and digital, but they've got to run on something. And so you're looking at quantum computing, you're looking at quantum sensors, which, by the way, are fascinating. There's been a lot of work and attention paid to quantum computing, new kinds of computers using quantum mechanics that will allow you to run things. It'll be a paradigm shift. It'll allow you, instead of integrated circuits, to create extraordinary, powerfully done stuff in a way that you couldn't do using existing technologies. But things like quantum sensors are already in play, and those are doing things like imagine replacing the entire GPS system. Right now, the problem with our GPS networks is that they're based on a whole constellation of satellites that beam down precise time locations, and you have a receiver in your car or your boat or your plane that picks that up and triangulates to figure out where you are. The problem with that is it's radio waves you're getting coming down. And as has been shown in a couple of very scary instances, it is actually possible to block those radio waves, not only by shielding, but by noise canceling headsets, by sending out anti-GPS signals, and so blowing up GPS. That's not a good thing, to have a system that the enemy can come in and cancel on you while you've got an intercontinental ballistic missile flying up there. But it turns out that if you use quantum sensors, some new quantum sensors that were originally developed at Google and spun out from Google, and if you use those to track minute fluctuations in the Earth's magnetic field, and you map the Earth's magnetic field, and you apply one to the other, you have effectively the ability to position yourself anywhere on the planet using these quantum sensors. And whether that's in the air or in a car or in a submarine, things you can't do, by the way, with GPS, you have amazing power there. What does that do? Well, that may well obviate the entire GPS system, which was just put up there at a cost of billions and billions of dollars, right? So you're looking at all of these areas, every area where people want to and have a need to get things, spend money, have value created. Any of those areas can be completely upended by the applications of these new frontier technologies.
So you raised an interesting question, which is two things. One is, what are we trying to achieve as builders for our economy? It's not about cost savings. It's not about, oh, is it about cost savings? Is it about efficiency? But what are we making? What are we building and why? So I'll take two examples. One is, which showed up in your slide earlier. One is the internal medicines that will help improve health and well-being for us and longevity of our lives. Totally get that. There are restrictions with the FDA and all that sort of stuff that may hold up adoption for this for a while. And then the other extreme is space, right? So one is inside our body, which we can't see. And then the other extreme is space, which we can't see. And so when you look at those two extremes, why are we doing what we do?
Well, we have this wonderful thing called the invisible hand. Adam Smith in The Wealth of Nations noted that through the actions of this invisible hand called the free market, entrepreneurs will often do more for the benefit of society than they would do if they set out to do something for the good of society just by self-optimizing for what they are doing themselves. And so whether it's the profit motive or whether it's the joy of discovery or something in the middle, we have this insatiable human need to create things, develop things, and we have a market economy that lets you make money out of it. The challenge that we've got, and for this point of this particular conversation, I wanted to be somewhat upbeat as opposed to downbeat, but I did found the finance, entrepreneurship, and economics track at Singularity University, and that leads you to some very interesting thought processes, right? When I see some of the questions here are asking about what will the effect of AI be on jobs, and the answer is it's going to be not only AI, but AI plus all of these new technologies will be dramatic. Again, dramatic beyond our capability of imagining drama. I mean, when we're talking about unemployment, in the Great Depression in 1930s in the U.S., where you had those awful, pictures of people starving in the Dust Bowl and so on and so forth, the absolute max that unemployment ever got to in the United States was in the low 20%, right? Except that if you look at what's happening now, if you look at which businesses and which, not necessarily businesses, but which jobs are being potentially upended by AI, you see many, many more than 25%. I would posit, if I were put to the rack, that it's be closer to 75%. And if you have 75% of the population being economically unemployable, what the heck does that do to the social fabric, to governments, to all kinds of things? The good news, however, and there is a good news silver lining in this, is that all of this technological development is going to produce things. It's not going to, spin tops in a corner. It is going to produce value. And so what you're seeing happening is the pace of value production across society is also going to grow. If not exponentially, it's certainly going to grow. We will produce more cars, more houses, more food, more books, more whatever. There will be just more value, ultimate value being created. The problem is it's not going to be created by people. It's going to be created by a very, very few people and a lot of machinery and a lot of technology. And eventually, if you continue all those curves up, the extent of things that are being taken over by technology, the speed of technology, the cost of technology, the ability of people to maintain an economic existence, you end up ultimately in what my friend Peter Diamandis, the other co-founder of Singularity University, along with Ray Kurzweil, has described as a world of abundance. When you have all of this harnessing of technology and energy and everything else, creating new value in a true abundant world. But in that abundant world, the value, the economic value, not the life value, not the emotional value, the intellectual value, but the economic value of an individual person will effectively be insignificant. And so then that leads to some fascinating discussions that I've been having with my father, who at 93 is writing his third and fourth books and is a thinker in the future, is talking about what will the world be like in a world in which nobody has to work. Right? Will you just sit, go become a gang leader just for the heck of it? Will you go invent new things? Will you be knitting, creating art, music? Those are fascinating things. Now, admittedly, that's a ways off, 20 years, plus or minus, whenever. And the question is right now, what do you invest in and what do you look for? And so getting back to the guts of your question is, how do you think about investing in this area? The first thing I would say is look at the business you're investing in. Is this a business that is relying on old think, on the world that in a world of scarce resources, employees or knowledge or capital or whatever is that existed in the 20th century? Or is it a business that is built on this new paradigm? Amazon is a perfect example in a whole lot of different ways, right? So when Jeff Bezos founded Amazon, his initial website, the world's biggest bookstore. Well, it wasn't a bookstore. It wasn't the world's biggest anything. It was a little website on a computer, in his office. But what he had done was he said, okay, well, I know from book wholesalers that I can, get any book in print. Well, I can just take that effective entire books in print list and put it onto my website. And if you order that book from me, I'll now go order it from the publisher and I'll send it to you. So effectively, it was a virtual bookstore. And by virtue of the fact that it had every book listed in print, it was the world's biggest bookstore, for which he got sued by Barnes & Noble, which is a whole nother story. But then having done that, and it began to take off, he realized that there was an interesting challenge with distribution. Instead of having to order it and then drop ship it to you several weeks later, they got to the point where he said, okay, I can leverage the best of modern technology and supply chain stuff, and I can build our entire giant warehouse on top of the FedEx hub in Memphis, Tennessee. And so then when you place an order up till 11 o'clock at night, we can just take a book from our warehouse and we'll stock the top, 10,000 or 100,000 or million books and kick it over to FedEx and have it sent right out to you in the next morning. And so he took advantage of that. And then something else came along. He said, okay, well, looking ahead with all of this Moore's Law and all this technology and reducing costs, clearly digital data, digital books are going to be important. And here I have built this entire operation to streamline the ordering and distribution of physical books from this warehouse using FedEx shipping and so on and so forth. But somebody's going to come along and kill me because they're going to have a digital book, which you can download over the phone, and that will blow up my entire need for my whole physical infrastructure. And so therefore, in lesson number one of being a smart guy, by creating an online platform, he completely blew out of the water Borders books and Barnes & Noble and the like. And he looked ahead and said, I am doomed to failure. My world's biggest bookstore, which is shipping physical books out to you, will be doomed to failure in light of somebody coming along and selling digital books. So therefore, I have to kill myself. And that's what he did by going in with both feet into the Kindle and digital books. It took less than 4 years for Amazon to sell more digital books via Kindle than all of the paperbacks and hardcovers that they had sold in their history. And so that was why they exploded. And then in what puts him into the pantheon, if that wasn't enough, the pantheon of entrepreneurs is he said effectively, okay, let's see, I killed Barnes & Noble, and digital books effectively killed the physical book then. Well, first of all, now that I have this entire distribution network and customer base and the like, I can now sell other things. So I'll become the world's biggest store for everything. And I can leverage independent sales units and people selling their own stores and stuff with my infrastructure. That's great. So he did that, and that's how they got to where they are now. And then he said, okay, but somebody else is going to kill me. Somebody's going to come along who can only do things digitally, forget anything physically. It'll all be digital. And that won't drive me out of business if I got a whole business based on physical delivery and physical operations. So he said, well, who's that going to be? Well, I don't know who that's going to be, but I want to get a piece of that. And so what had taken him billions of dollars to build in terms of this entire back-end computing infrastructure to keep Amazon alive and functioning. He said, okay, I'm now going to potentially kill my own business by opening this up to everybody, because I don't know who the next genius is who's going to come up with something that's going to be killing me on a digital basis, but I know they're going to need cloud-based infrastructure. So that's how they created Amazon Web Services and began to supply all of this computing power that was his competitive advantage to his competitors and anybody else. You want to create a bookstore, a digital bookstore online? Use AWS. Jeff Bezos will sell you the cloud computing power to compete against him doing this, because he gets his piece off the back end. So it's that kind of continual reinvention, going from, in the case of Apple Computer, from a computer to a phone to an internet thing to reality vision goggles to a watch to a music player to a software store. This constant reinvention is required. And so when you're looking at a business, see if they are either a new entrant now, which is leveraging many of these new technologies to do something that other businesses couldn't do, or if they are that rare unicorn of somebody who has a track record but has managed to leverage and flip their position of power in the old world into doing something really interesting in the new world.
Wow. I can't keep up with this. I just want to make a little bit of we've got so many questions and I could see them all streaming in here. I know we were supposed to stop at 10, and I just wanted to say, do you have flexibility to go a little bit more? All right, so the audience that's here, guys, David has kindly agreed to go on a little bit longer because we want to address some of these questions. So Sarah asks, many people believe AI will take over creative industries like music, entertainment, etc. Thus, many artists, authors, and musicians can make them irrelevant. Can you talk about implications AI might have on human art and culture?
Well, I don't know if everybody on this call is aware of the announcement that Adobe made 2 weeks ago. If not, I will tell you that in my estimation, it is as significant as the ChatGPT announcement in November of 2022. And it hasn't yet quite hit the common zeitgeist yet. And that is that Adobe announced that they were now building generative AI directly into Photoshop, and it was immediately available as of last week for you to work with. And I have done it. And again, it is literally mind-boggling. You can now take Photoshop, which has this dominant 80% plus share in the professional graphics world, and you can select, using your existing Photoshop tools, anything you want, and then you can type in, do this, add this in here, create a whatever. And it will do that. It will take your things. It'll extend your existing backgrounds. I mean, I had a headshot of a executive I was working on with a presentation, and I really needed a full body shot. So I just took this headshot. I expanded the size of the image. I selected the top, the head, and the torso, and said, okay, generate. And then right before your eyes, it creates the whole rest of the body. It throws in the rest of his jacket, his pants, his shoes, and now you have a full-length portrait of this guy standing there. I mean, so this kind of tool, by the way, if you have Photoshop and you have not yet downloaded the Photoshop data and played with generative AI, you absolutely get off this call and go do it. It will literally blow your mind. And so you're going to see these tools for artists. And by the way, that's just one thing. If we had more time to do demos and stuff, there are sound things. You can now use generative AI to generate a completely realistic human sounding voice that is indistinguishable, literally. You can listen to it from a computer. If this is not your old robotics, this sounds just like me talking or Karim, and you can tell it what you want it to sound like, and it'll sound natural. You have the ability to manipulate, there are now a number of things in the labs that you can actually see demos of and play with, where you can take a 2D image and manipulate it in 3D. If you have a picture of me that looks like this, you can go to this program and literally take your mouse and go, And from a 2D shot, it will generate the rest of my head and let you manipulate physically things in 3D. So the combination of generative art, where you can tell the computer what you want, and manipulative art capability, where you can take existing things and do it, the effects and the tools that are available now to artists will be, again, unthinkable. And so therefore, it's going to be a question of, you have new tools, what can you as the artist do with it? If you're talking about some mundane thing for advertising purposes, show me a cat sitting on a clock, boom, cat on a clock, okay, done. I don't need an artist for that. But if you are truly a creative artist, you will be able to use these tools to do unbelievably amazing things. And that's what's really interesting, because when I said 75% unemployment, people are saying, oh, well, there have always been, new technology creates new jobs. Well, all kinds of jobs exist today, didn't exist 5 years ago because of technology. A LLM prompt writer, a social media manager, a drone pilot, right? These were non-existent kinds of things, but they now exist. And so therefore, for the creme de la creme, the top 25% of human people, what they will be able to do with AI, and that includes creative types, writers and artists and video producers and the like, they will be able to take their genius and their vision and expand it beyond realms that you couldn't believe in with technology. But for all the mundane quotidian stuff, where journeymen were just knocking off things for baseline things, that's all going to be obviated and gone.
Thank you. Here's a question that's important to all of us is, we talked about AI, we talked about the hardware infrastructure, and then we talked about companies using the programming on AI to make things happen, the generative AI. So we've got actually two companies on our platform today. Cerebras, that is manufacturing or the hardware of massive computing power. And then we've got Samba Nova, which actually uses AI tools to create great opportunities for enterprises. And some of the questions on here is, if you look at the kind of companies that you know of, what other companies should we bring into our platform for our investors? I mean, I know that's probably difficult to answer right away.
Well, one of the things that you see as an angel investor, and as you know, I wrote the textbook on how to be an angel investor. I've got about 120 companies in my portfolio, and angels catch things really, really early on. And the difference between an angel investor and a late stage investor is that we are betting on the founder, we're betting on the vision, we're betting on the teeniest little bit of traction that they might have so far, their first or second customer over here, but it's still very much a bet on the vision and the founder. In your case, you're investing in much later stage companies, and their traction is king, right? And you can look back at this company that's got, $500 million in revenue or whatever it is, and you can see what it's done, and you can begin to do trend lines that you can't possibly do at the earliest stages. So I think the primary thing I would look for in each of these areas is traction. And if you can find something with exponential traction, right, the way sort of Airbnb was in its earlier days and Uber when they were starting, regardless of the industry it's in, once you catch those guys who have a vision that is in tune with this, forthcoming singularity or the advancing technology, and they have proven it by having traction that is growing at this exponential level, regardless of the industry, that's where I would look.
Perfect, thank you. We've got so here's one by Fernando. What applications are you most excited about generative AI? And are there some players in those spaces that you're looking at?
Well, generative AI is just, people keep using the term mind-blowing, because literally, if you start looking at stuff, your mind blows. It is the things that this stuff can do is so unbelievable that it is difficult to even conceive. If you take a look at the latest GPT-4 stuff out there that they're now selling subscriptions to, one of the things that it can do is it can look at images and it can make inferential decisions from those images. And they have a great example in one of their demos, which shows like a seesaw with a fulcrum and a object sitting over here and a weight on a string over here. And if you type in, given this picture, what happens if I cut the string? it will correctly say, oh, if you cut the string, the weight will drop and the law of physics will cause it to pivot across this axis and throw the thing up in the air, right? That's beginning to get close to human intelligence in terms of generating things out there. So one of the guys in my company had the idea several months ago of seeing if you could use GPT to create a text adventure, like the text adventure games we used to play back in the 80s and 90s. And so it wasn't programmed to do that. But it turns out if you go to ChatGPT and you say, hey, ChatGPT, let's play a text adventure game like the 1980s. And so I tried that and it comes back, oh, that's a good idea. What kind of game would you like? A science fiction game, a noir thing, this or that? I said, oh, and you give it prompts and it will literally create an entire game for you on the fly, right? So wow. the people have no clue until you have looked at ChatGPT, looked at things other people are doing with it, and let your mind just literally, open up and think about it. You cannot, this is not just a super Google. This really is the beginnings of general artificial intelligence. And because it's trained on this wealth of billions and billions of pages of human data, it can do virtually anything that a human could do, which is really scary and really fascinating and really exciting.
So here's another question is, and this is always a question that all investors ask, what are your thoughts on the importance of timing in investing? How do you assess the right time to invest in a particular industry or market?
Good news, bad news. The good news is that timing is really, really important. And the difference between investing at the bottom of the cycle when it's about to take off and the top of the cycle when it's about to go down is enormous. The bad news is there are very, very, very few people, not including me, who can time the cycles. And so the question about when to invest, I mean, Gartner has the idea of the hype cycle. And if you're not familiar with the Gartner hype cycle, I would encourage all of our listeners here to go Google it and download it. And the hype cycle basically was Gartner's observation that for every new technology, something happens, there's a trigger event. And then people say, whoa, imagine what could happen if this happens on the whole world. And it goes up like this, and there is that goes to the peak of inflated expectations. Okay, we see the first self-driving car. Well, tomorrow morning, everybody cars can be self-driving. It'll blow up the whole universe. And so, stocks go like this. And then there is the trough of whatever, the trough of failure or something, where all of the first generation things turn out to be not particularly economic, and it doesn't work, and the car kills somebody and whatever. And people are saying, oh, that's not the time to invest. And then you have the second and third generations where the technology begins to actually find its footing and find its use and begins to get deployed across multiple industries. And then you finally reach the plateau of productivity in which you have this new technology is now creating real value. And every year Gartner does a chart where they show you where they think various technologies are on this hype cycle. And if you're looking for a guide in terms of timing, that might be as good as any that exists, a general purpose guide to where these technologies are, but given that nobody can predict them.
So we just did a very quick poll about where most investors get their information from, and the most outstanding response was podcasts and conversations like this. So before we start losing people, where can we find what your thoughts are on a regular basis? Do you have a podcast, a webinar, a book that we can have everyone follow?
I appreciate the question. Much of my writing these days is actually on a site called Quora. It's a question and answer website that you may be familiar with. I've written over 12,000 answers to questions that people ask me on Quora over a decade. So that's one thing. You can follow me online. My handle is David S. Rose, DavidSrose, which is my standard handle across everything from Twitter to Facebook to LinkedIn and the like. So I have been generally focused on I'm doing events like this because it's so fast moving. This stuff is literally changing every day. So if you follow me on LinkedIn and Twitter, I will generally post when I'm doing things like this. I'm working on my third book now, and there might be a fourth book in the future. But this stuff is moving so fast that what you want to do is keep your eyes open and don't just think of technology as something somebody else is doing. If there's one takeaway from this session today, it should be that technology is permeating everything and it is having a fundamentally transformative effect on everything. And so therefore, no matter whether you think of yourself as an investor or a technologist or simply an artist in an ivory tower sketching something, technology will affect you and you will be well served by following the press and following what is happening.
Well, I'm still going to hold you for your 10-minute extension here, though. As we are going to two more questions, if we there's so many questions here that we haven't got to, but I'm really fascinated by this conversation. If you'd like to see David back, maybe we can encourage him to come back, but we need to see a huge response in our chat section here saying, we would love to see Richard back. We'd love to see David back. So as soon as I see like 50 responses, then David, then you're on the hook for that.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We like to be stroked.
Two more questions before we we have a lot of investors here that are investors in the new digital currency, digital assets, the crypto environment, distributed ledger technologies. What are your thoughts on that whole environment?
So it's really interesting. For context, I'm a founding general partner of a fund called True Global Ventures, which is an international blockchain fund that only invests in blockchain and Web3. And I've been looking at this space for quite a while. You have to divide out the various things. People who are not in the industry tend to think of everything as one giant word, no spaces, cryptocurrency, Web3, blockchain, metaverse. It's all one big thing out there, and it's bullshit. Okay, no, it's not. It's very real, but you got to take it a piece at a time. So for example, blockchain. Blockchain is fundamentally important. It is a big thing. It will be a bigger thing. The idea of international global platforms that are trustless, non-intermediated platforms where people can operate in a trust and effectively a universal trust environment and interchange is really critical. So that's why we did TGV4, and that's why we invest in things in that space. We've got some fascinating investments in companies that are in the mobility space and in the tracking the supply chain in pharmaceuticals and other kinds of things. So blockchain, really important. Web3. Well, Web3 gets into a whole very other interesting area of what can you do to build things on top of blockchain and how will things interact, both physical and digital. Web3 is going to be very important. Do I think the timing will be as near term as Mark Zuckerberg thought it was? No, it's not. It's clearly farther out than that, but it's going to be really important. The idea of underlying blockchain as a carrier for currency, really important. For the first time, you can actually have currencies that exist within a non-fiat environment. So really important. But let's divide that into a couple of things. Digital currencies, which are simply currencies that are functionally affected on the blockchain without any fancy schmancy computational stuff other than is required for their existence, are going to be the future. There's no question that every currency, every global currency in the world will move to digital. There will be a digital US dollar by the US government, just as there will be a digital euro and so on and so forth. It may not happen today, tomorrow, next week, next year, next decade. 20 years from now, guaranteed, you're going to have digital dollars, digital euros, out there, right? So then you get to the question of cryptocurrency, and cryptocurrency in the whole world of tokenomics and programmatic currencies that rely for their value on various kinds of manipulation. That's a very tricky area. Unfortunately, the vast majority of all of these crypto projects over the last decade have been scams. They've been get-rich-quick things. relying totally on speculation and just bad news. That's why people have lost so much money in those areas. The smaller version of that are people who are actually creating a new currency for a particular use and market where it works with that particular market use. And that's really interesting. We haven't seen anything yet there that is really full-on functional and really growing at these rates. But I would not be surprised to see something in terms of a market-backed digital currency or something in a particular industry come into play. But the blockchain in terms of the hype cycle, blockchain hit the top of the hype cycle a while ago, and cryptocurrency, and now we're somewhere still heading down. So digital currencies, blockchain, very, very real. Crypto per se, anything that is currently crypto related out there now, I would be cautious.
There's so much there to absorb. Talk to us a little bit, and I want to make this, or maybe one more question, or last question, so that I respect your time. Talk to us a little bit more about emerging nations and where we are as a nation in terms of technology development and consumption in regards to emerging nations.
So, well, the U.S. is the #1 consumer economy in the world. We have, 5% of the world's population and consumes, 20% or whatever is of its resources and stuff. And so this is a challenge. As historically, if you had to average things, if you had to average the U.S. standard of living across the world, the result would be that everybody in China, India, and developing countries would have a significantly increased lifestyle, by a bit. And you'd have the U.S. lifestyle would, drop down by an enormous amount. As you have a world of abundance where things increasingly are developed by technology, produced by technology, a rising tide lifts all boats. And in that world of abundance, I believe you will begin to solve many of the Maslowian hierarchy early levels, right? I believe we will begin to see things like food and shelter and basic energy stuff solved on a global basis. And that will fundamentally change the way the world works. But you therefore come down to the question of nationalism and what countries are doing and the zeitgeist of a country, what it values. Do you value a totally libertarian, free market, pure capitalist Darwinian society? Do you value a very socialist society where there are less extremes and you can't make trillions of dollars, but everybody has a lifestyle? Do you value a place that's competitive where you have incentives, economic and otherwise, to charge forward? Or do you value one in which everybody has a base level and ambitions are at a different level? So these are fascinating questions. Half my family is involved in these things. My brother was the editor of Foreign Affairs magazine, and as I said, my father's currently writing a book on this stuff. And I don't know where that's going to go. Clearly, we have the immediate near-term political challenges around the world are formidable. I mean, we are facing some serious challenges with a polarization of stuff in the U.S. that is really problematic. You're seeing other challenges with refugees and other things in Europe now, not to mention the whole Ukraine-Russia situation. And so it's a little early to see where the long-term effects of this are going to be. But I believe ultimately the technology, I am one of those few optimists who believe that ultimately technology will be a leveler. And you only have to look at places like Singapore and Israel, where you have countries that have few resources, didn't have oil, didn't have shipping, didn't have all kinds of stuff, but they had populations that invested in education and were ambitious and were capitalistic oriented, and they've done remarkably well, outstripping their neighbors. And so I think you will see that over time, some countries will be able to, regardless of their natural resources, which historically were the driving power in a country's dominance, as technology levels the playing field, you get more to the country's zeitgeist. And I think it'll be fascinating to see how that plays out.
Yeah, we have covered so much, and yet there is still so much to cover. But we are at that time. So the last question, David, all the folks that are going to listen, that are on this call and will listen to this call, we're all in the same environment, I think, in terms of interest, investors, age, and demographics. And if you were to say, what should we do for ourselves to make sure that we make the right decisions over the next 10 to 20 years, leave us with some of those thoughts that you would have.
Sure. So I will leave you with two overriding thoughts about this. One of them is exponentials, right? That's my version of plastics from the graduate. That's why I've just spent an hour discussing exponentials with you. And so you have to fully grok that. At Singularity University, and so by the way, when Ray Kurzweil came out with his book, The Singularity is Near, about 12 years ago, the reactions to this projection, remember this is 12 years ago, that by 2045, the world will be completely changed and computers and humans would merge. The reactions were, one group of people said, that's ridiculous. That'll never happen. Technology will never equal people and blah, blah, blah. A second group said, okay, yeah, your analysis is correct, but don't worry about 2045 because we're not going to get there. We're going to blow the planet up with a suitcase nuke or boil it out of existence with climate crisis or something. And so figure out how to solve the problems now because we're not getting there. The third group said, okay, if you take that as if not gospel, at least the direction of where things are heading, what do we do about it? And that group got together and founded Singularity University. So Singularity University was founded by Google and NASA and Cisco and Nokia and Autodesk and a bunch of Kauffman Foundation, a bunch of major venture firms and the like, as well as individual folks like me, to begin thinking about, given this knowledge of exponential growth, how do you do things, make decisions today to work on affecting the future? And so the first thing I would suggest, and I'm not kidding about this, is understand exponentials and understand where everything is likely to go. You don't have to be a technologist to look at the world around you and say, whoa, what would happen if, computing power is 1,000 times more and 1,000 times lower cost and stuff? How does the world change? So get in the habit of thinking about everything in terms of exponentials. I joke that the one lasting benefit of Singularity University is it gives you a permanently affixed pair of augmented reality goggles where the augmentation is to look at everything through the perspective of exponentials, number one. And then number two, this is because I'm a goody two-shoes, or I was raised in the US, or I come from a family of philanthropists or whatever, but I really believe in positive thinking. There's a wonderful thesis of tikkun olam, which is to heal the world, right? And so I think if everybody looks at things from a global perspective, right? Climate crisis may not affect your life in the next 6 months or 12 months directly. There's nothing or little you can do in terms of climate crisis that will change the world or its effect on you personally. But if everybody takes that position, we're going to have a complete climate crisis here that is likely to doom the planet, right? So therefore, you need to think globally. Think in terms of exponentials and think about globally, how is what you are doing contributing to society? And so therefore, everything I invest in, I think of myself as an impact investor, but a financial first impact investor. So I invest to make a buck, but there is an impact floor. Everything I do has to have, at least in my estimation, some positive impact on society. And I would think that if everybody is thinking about making a positive impact on society, and you do so knowing where the world is going in terms of exponentials, that's the best we're going to be able to do in this crazy, constantly changing world.
Wonderful. I thank you so much for those thoughts. And I'm going to throw this out there as well. So, on our platform, we're in mid to late stage growth companies that we want to bring to our investors. But I am sure there are other people here that are all investing in early stage. Is this something that we can facilitate for whether you have a fund or whether, how would you like people to get involved with your investments?
As an angel investor, I tend to invest very, very, very early. So, and I don't raise a fund. I've been asked to do funds for decades, and being a fund manager and investing other people's money is a certainly worthwhile organization. I think that's what all VCs do, and private equity folks. It's a fiduciary responsibility to your investors, and I've chosen not to do that. So I invest for my own nickel, and I try and give back by sessions like this, and I do a lot of teaching and the like. So I appreciate the offer or the question. And so most of the ventures that I invest in are very, very early stage. I'm typically the first or the second check in, where they simply wouldn't want and can't take large scale investments or large crowdfunding kinds of platforms. So in that sense, the answer is no. But I would suggest, if you are interested in investing in larger, later stage companies that are doing really interesting things, that's the stuff that Karim and Linqto are doing, where you can get a piece of things that you wouldn't otherwise be able to get a piece of as an individual investor. If you're interested also in investing yourself directly into these early stage companies, join an angel group. There are hundreds of angel investor groups, local angel investor groups in the US. I founded a platform called Gust, which is what back ends most of them and connects them, and they use for their deal flow and the like. But these angel groups are places in which you can find fellow spirits, people who are also of means, they're accredited investors, and they are looking to invest not lots and lots of money, but typically a typical angel investor check is about $25,000 per company per angel. And that's a great way to get started. And so if there's anybody on this call who is interested in being, additionally to Linqto and other investments, an individual personal angel investor, let me suggest you check out my book. It's Angel Investing, The Gust Guide to Making Money and Having Fun Investing in Startups. Angelinvesting.com will give you a link to various places where you can buy it. It's Kindle and Nook and hardcover and Amazon and Barnes & Noble, wherever. So that's the standard textbook on how to be an angel. It'll give you a pretty good understanding of the economics and the way you diligence companies and approach them. And that might be a good place to start if you want to be an individual angel investor.
Thank you. Just to let everyone know that Linqto actually is a partner member of Angel Capital Association. That is the not-for-profit governing body for angel groups across the US. They have 206 angel groups and 16,000 members right now. We're working closely with Angel Capital Association. David is part of that, and we wanted to thank them for their support, and thank you, David, for this wonderful experience. I did see over 50 yeses for you to come back.
I win.
So yeah, you win. So we'll have to find time for that at a certain point, and then answer several of the questions that we haven't answered, and then delve deeper into so many things: education, climate, energy, space, health, tech. There are so many things that we haven't been able to do, but thank you so much.
My pleasure. Thank you all.
Thank you for everyone who's attended here. Thank you so much for making sure that David got a bunch of yeses so we can have him back. Thank you for everything. Thank you for the Linqto team for putting this together. Be sure to check out what we have on our platform. We are mid to late stage investment opportunities for accredited investors. And I cannot take my hats off and give a round of applause to all of you who attended today and supported this. And it drives this conversation. And let's keep connected. Let's make sure we communicate, because with communication, knowledge, and sharing of enthusiasm, we all are happier and succeed. Remember, David left us with these parting words. Whatever you do with a global perspective, keeping in mind that whatever we do as individuals affects people, environment, health, culture, and joy for everyone around us. So let's be thoughtful about how we do things. So let's pay attention to that. Thank you so much.